the gap, standing for Jesus. Standing in the gap for family and friends. Standing in the gap, one love for all, so we all can make it in.
We have dedicated a certain part of our ministry, each broadcast ministry, to bringing you up to date on the current events of the day. And Marvel has taken that on. We call it Gap News, where she brings out some issue from today's headlines, and we puts it before you to keep you up to date, because God put us in this world because He so loved the world, so He wants us to interact in it, and so we need to know what's going on. So Marvel, what's going on?
Good morning again, Saints. So, Sister Michelle, I hope you liked last week's Gap News. I know you weren't able to join us live, but I saw on the messages that you did get a chance to see it. You suggested that we cover Judge Michael Luddick, and I would love to see in the chat what you thought about that. But everything is always happening in the world. That's what we're doing with the Gap News. So this week, we had the UN passed a resolution for a ceasefire in Gaza. And then towards the end of the week, we had a phenomenal, first of its kind ever fundraiser with three Democratic living presidents in New York City. So we got the ceasefire, the event, and then I got a little treat at the end. I'm not going to tell you.
The UN Security Council has just passed a resolution demanding a ceasefire in Gaza. The exact wording is an immediate ceasefire for the month of Ramadan, which would mean both Israel and Hamas end hostilities starting now until at least April 9th.
14 votes in favor, 0 vote against, 1 abstention. The draft resolution has been adopted.
This success is notable because of how many past failures to agree there have been, 4 by my count. The abstention is also extraordinary. That's the United States, signaling a very fundamental break from Israel. And this has created some new rifts. It's all developing as I speak, but let's try to understand what's happened as best we can. The headline you'll see everywhere is UN votes for an immediate ceasefire, but that's actually just one of 3 parts of what the Security Council has agreed to. The second demand is for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. On October 7th, Hamas took more than 200 hostages. Today, best estimates are that they still have around 130 of them, hidden in their vast tunnel network. The UN wants them returned. The third demand is for what the UN calls the urgent need to expand the flow of humanitarian assistance. That's aid. The UN wants all barriers to providing aid at scale lifted, and it wants to see the people, the civilians of Gaza, protected.
To silence the guns as the only way to address the problems of the population in Gaza.
How do you do this, or any of this, exactly? That's not the purpose of the resolution. You'll rarely find those kinds of details in these kinds of agreements. They're more about signaling intent. And to secure that kind of consensus on this file, it hasn't been done before.
The United States stands with Israel. We will not ever fail to have their back.
Until now, Israel has been able to rely on the United States to veto all such resolutions for a ceasefire that have been tabled up until this point. It did so in November, in December, and again last month. But the relationship between Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu has become more difficult. The US, too, has been under constant international and domestic pressure. It has mobilized warships, lost American sailors and soldiers in the Red Sea and beyond, and in the face of a climbing death toll in Gaza, more than 32,000, according to Gaza's health ministry, coupled with a humanitarian wasteland that has displaced nearly all of the 2 million Palestinians who live in the Gaza Strip. The US calculation of how much war it can tolerate this does to the relationship between the US and Israel is unclear. Almost immediately, Israel declared it was canceling a planned trip to Washington, which was reportedly to discuss a ground invasion of Rafah, something Joe Biden opposes.
It seems like the Prime Minister's office is choosing to create a perception of daylight here when they don't need to do that.
But the US insisted, even after abstaining from this resolution for a ceasefire, that none of this was a shift in policy. Nothing's changed, they say. But the world's resolve to stop the war in Gaza has hardened.
After more than 5 months of a war of utter terror and destruction, a ceasefire is the difference between life and death for the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians.
One more thing. The goal of the resolution does stretch beyond just calling for an immediate ceasefire. It believes this should pave the way towards a permanent ceasefire.
A top-level meeting between Israeli and U.S. officials is back on. Prime Minister Netanyahu had previously called off the meeting after the U.S. failed to veto a UN Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire.
Netanyahu says he canceled it as a warning to Hamas. Israel will not be pressured into ending the war. Chris Mitchell reports.
Announcing that the Israeli delegation to Washington is back on, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he canceled it to warn Hamas that Israel will not be pressured into ending the war or giving up on its hostages.
It is inconceivable because the Democratic Party is fundamentally sane and the Republican Party has been lost to Trumpian madness to the point that Mike Pence refusing to endorse Donald Trump is now considered perfectly normal in Trump world. The unique ability of the Democratic Party to put 3 presidents on stage together in Radio City Music Hall, the largest indoor theater in the world with seats for 6,013 people, means that the sold-out event that the Democratic Party ran tonight means that the Biden-Harris campaign have the most powerful fundraising operation in the history of American politics. Those voters don't know about so many of the Biden accomplishments that can be easily summarized in 30-second commercials.
With the president visiting 8 swing states in just 18 days, throughout the month, Biden has crisscrossed the country. Visiting the Southwest, the Blue Wall, and the South. His campaign stops have focused on border security, reproductive rights, lowering health care and housing costs, as well as celebrating CHIPS and Science Act investments.
Okay, so we got a few things going on here to unpack. First of all, the U.S. vetoed UN resolutions, I think 3 or 4 times about this ceasefire in Gaza. But last week, the United States put forth a resolution for a ceasefire, immediate ceasefire, but it tied a basically a rebuke of Hamas to that resolution. That resolution was vetoed by Russia and China. So then the UN circled back around and came up with this new resolution. And this time, the US did not veto it. It abstained. So then that resolution passed. So now that's out there. Israel got upset. Benjamin Netanyahu canceled the meeting. They were supposed to be coming over here and talking with us. And then I guess just from the amount of pressure he was getting on all fronts, he decided, well, okay, we'll go ahead and do the meeting, and we're not going to say it was because we were mad at the U.S. We're going to say we were, flexing our muscle to Hamas. That was a lot, honey. What do you have to say?
Well, basically that this thing's gone on for what, 5 months now, and they've reportedly killed over 30,000 people, a lot of children, and all that. I know Bibi Netanyahu talks about the Bible, where it says God had ordered Israel to kill every man, woman, and child when they were going into the Holy Land and all that. And so he wants to use that as justification. But, that was a special circumstance. God had judged those people, and then God had issued that command. Now, Bibi Netanyahu can't tell me that God issued him a command to destroy everybody over in the Gaza Strip. And from his actions, God talked to his holy people and gave them that the leaders and all that. But Netanyahu doesn't have the characteristics of the leaders that makes me believe that God told him to go over there and destroy everybody that's in that area. And plus, it seems to go totally against the Micah 6:8 proclamation of to do justice. Now that doesn't mean that Israel had a right to retaliate on the attack that they had, but Mike also says show mercy, and to walk humbly with God. I can't see Netanyahu getting out in front of God saying what I'm going to do and all that stuff, and God, you come along with me. That doesn't work. That's totally against Micah 6:8, and it's time for that to cease over there. Now keep doing whatever you do to keep your people safe. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is that at some point in time, you gotta put an end to that.
And there are a lot of other things that are in play. First of all, he's been indicted, and he's going to trial as soon as he is no longer the prime minister. And they say he's very guilty and will be convicted and sent to jail. So some people are saying he's trying to extend the war to, keep himself out of jail. And then he's aligned himself with these very far right leaders who do believe in, genocide, and the other thing about that is, back in the 1940s, they created Israel and Palestine. That was a new thing. That was like almost a new covenant. And God didn't say anything about destroy all those people. He said, he didn't say that. They said they would live together in peace. And of course, ever since then, they have not. So that's another big part of it, I think, is that he's trying to prolong the war to save his skin.
All right.
Well, that's not all. So then the three presidents got together. Oh my gosh. They went over to Radio City Hall and Radio City, whatever it is, the largest indoor auditorium, and raised over $26 million in 2 hours. Those two former presidents, Clinton and Obama, are lockstep supporting and endorsing and helping in the campaign of Joe Biden. And we just opposed that against Donald Trump, who his own vice president, Mike Pence, did not endorse. The former vice president, Dick Cheney, did not endorse. Basically, none of the Bushes do not endorse. So that was very interesting. And then I love that little, campaign ad, which that was just kind of the icing on the cake. Any comments on that?
No, I think we've done enough on that.
Okay. Okay, that's your Gap News.
Yeah, it's great that news. Keeping us up to date on